Every Wednesday, I would pass out in the bathtub. For months, I thought it was normal, just part of the process of having a baby, until my sister discovered the dark truth my husband was hiding. Good afternoon, my dears. My name is Eleanor. I'm 87 years old today, and I'm going to share with you a story that I've kept in my heart for decades. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to know in the comments where you're watching from, which city, which state you're following the story of this grandma who lived to tell the tale. Let's go back to 1963. I was just 25 years old, with long black hair, skin without wrinkles, and a dream in my heart: to start a family. We lived in Millbrook, a small town where everybody knew everybody. Back then, marrying young was normal. Girls my age already had 2 or 3 children. And I had just married Theodore. Theodore. When I think about him today, I feel a mix of pain and relief for having escaped. But back then, he was considered the best catch in town. He worked at the only bank in town and wore a suit every day. His shoes shined so brightly you could see your reflection. My father had passed away recently, leaving me the house where I grew up. A simple wooden house with a backyard full of cherry trees and a porch where I would sit every afternoon to watch the sunset. In the first months of marriage, everything seemed like a dream. Theodore was attentive. He'd bring small gifts when he returned from work. He'd tell stories from the bank that made me laugh. On Sundays, we'd go to church together and then have lunch with my mother. The only cloud in our sky was that after almost a year of marriage, I still hadn't gotten pregnant. You need to understand how it was back then. A woman without children was viewed with suspicion, as if something was wrong with her. The neighbors whispered, aunts asked when the baby would come, and with each passing month, I felt more and more anguished. I cried in secret when my period arrived. I prayed every day to the Virgin Mary, asking for the miracle of a child. Theodore said he didn't mind, that we had time, but I saw how he looked at our friends' children with a certain envy in his eyes. That's when his other face began to appear, the one I only discovered much later. One Wednesday in April, he came home early from the bank, bringing a small brown paper package. "Look what I got, Ellie," he said with gleaming eyes. Inside the package were dried herbs, dark green with a strong smell like wet grass. My colleague Jerry gave them to me. His wife took this tea for 3 months and got pregnant right after. It's from a healer from the Appalachian Mountains. My heart raced with hope. Can you imagine? When we want something so badly, we cling to any possibility, however small. "How do you prepare it?" I asked, already thinking about taking it that very day. "It has to be on Wednesdays," explained Theodore, very seriously. "It's St. Gerard's Day, patron of expectant mothers, and you have to follow a ritual. I'll prepare the tea for you. You drink it all at once, and then immediately take a hot bath. The heat of the water activates the principles of the herbs." Our house had that old clawfoot bathtub. It was heavy, cast iron, painted white on the outside. It had belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, and now it was mine. I rarely used it. I preferred the shower for practicality, but if that was the ritual needed to have my child, I would do it without question. The tea was as bitter as hell, a sensation that scraped my throat. Theodore always put in plenty of honey to mask it, but it was still difficult to swallow. I would drink it all in one gulp, as he instructed, and run to the bathtub already prepared with hot water and bath salts. The first time I took the tea, I noticed something strange. About 10 minutes after getting into the tub, I began to feel a drowsiness I had never experienced before. It was as if my limbs weighed tons, my eyelids closed against my will. I remember fighting to stay awake, trying to get up from the tub, but my body wouldn't respond. The last thing I remember was the warm water enveloping my body and a distant buzzing in my ears. When I woke up, I was in bed, dressed in my nightgown, and Theodore was sitting beside me, holding my hand with a worried expression. "What happened?" I asked, still confused. "You fell asleep in the bathtub, honey," he said, caressing my face. "I found you there when I got back. I was so worried. You could have drowned." I was embarrassed. I had never heard of anyone who fell asleep during a bath, but Theodore reassured me. "Jerry's wife went through the same thing. It's the tea. It's so powerful that it causes this deep sleep. That's how it works in the body, preparing it to receive a new life." And so began our Wednesday ritual. Every week, Theodore would leave work early, prepare the bitter tea, I would drink it and go to the bathtub. Every week I would fall asleep for about 15 to 20 minutes. Every week I would wake up in bed with Theodore by my side, saying he had found me sleeping in the water. After a few weeks, I began to find it strange that I always fell asleep exactly the same way. I mentioned this to Theodore, who made a worried face. "Is the tea too strong for you? We can stop if you want." But stopping was out of the question for me. I wanted that baby so badly. And in that small town, options for fertility treatment were non-existent. That tea was my only hope. "No, let's continue," I insisted. "If that's how it works, then that's how it should be." And we continued for almost 3 months. The hope of getting pregnant made me ignore all the red flags. The tea that was too bitter, the immediate drowsiness, the fact that I always woke up in bed, never in the bathtub. The few times I commented to Theodore that it was strange to always pass out in the bath, he said it was normal, that it was part of the process, that soon I would see the results. That's when my younger sister, Teresa, came to visit us. Tess, as I called her, was 20 years old and had a very different personality from mine. Where I was trusting and credulous, she was suspicious and observant. From the first day of my marriage, she never liked Theodore. "He has the eyes of a fox," she would say, "the kind that sneaks into the henhouse quietly." I always defended my husband. I said that Tess was jealous because I had gotten married, that she would eventually see how Theodore was a good man. When she arrived to spend a week with us, I made sure to show how happy we were, how attentive he was, how perfect our life was. When Wednesday came, I told her about our fertility tea ritual. I expected her to be impressed by Theodore's dedication, by how much he wanted a child just as much as I did. Instead, she furrowed her brow and asked, "Why only on Wednesdays? And why do you always sleep in the bathtub? That doesn't seem normal, Eleanor." "It's St. Gerard's Day," I explained, repeating what Theodore always said. "And the sleep is because of the herbs. They're very strong." Tess didn't seem convinced, but she didn't insist. That afternoon, after lunch, Theodore prepared the tea as usual. As I was drinking it, Tess announced she was going to the market to buy fresh fruit for dessert. "Won't you wait to see me come out of the bathtub?" I joked. "I might need someone to wake me up today." "I'll be back soon," she said, grabbing her purse. "I won't be more than half an hour." I finished my tea and went to the bathroom, where the bathtub was already filled with hot, perfumed water. I sank in with pleasure, feeling the heat relaxing my muscles. As always, after a few minutes, I began to feel that familiar drowsiness. I tried to fight against it, tried to stay awake to see what happened, but it was impossible. It was as if someone had put weights on my eyelids. The last thing I remember was the sound of water rippling around my body. What happened next? I only found out later from Teresa's mouth, and it was something that changed the course of my life forever. Well, As I was saying, on that Wednesday in June of 1963, Teresa didn't go to the market as she had said. It was a trick, a ruse that only my clever little sister could think of. After announcing she was leaving, she went around the house and came back in through the back door without making a noise. She went straight to our bedroom and hid in the large oak wardrobe in the corner. It was a huge wardrobe, one of those antiques that girls received as part of their trousseau. It had been my mother's, and then came to me. The interior was spacious, with a smell of mothballs and lavender from the sachets I placed between the clothes. Teresa crouched among the hanging dresses and left a small crack in the door to observe the room. According to what she told me later, she stayed there breathing as silently as possible for almost 10 minutes. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Theodore, who should have been in the living room reading the newspaper while I took my bath. He entered the room stealthily, as quiet as a cat. First, he went to the bathroom door and put his ear to it. He knocked lightly and called out, "Eleanor, everything okay in there?" There was no response. I must have already been asleep in the bathtub. That's when his behavior changed completely. The gentle face he showed me gave way to a cold, calculating expression. He looked at his wristwatch as if timing something, and then he began. First, he went to the dresser where I kept my jewelry. He opened every drawer, rummaged through every corner, then lifted the mattress of the bed, checking if there was anything hidden there. He took all the books from the small bookshelf, leafing through them page by page. It was as if he was looking for something very specific. After searching the room for a few minutes, he went to the closet and started rummaging through my shoeboxes, my purses, even the pockets of my dresses. His expression grew increasingly frustrated. He tapped his foot nervously, ran his hand through his hair. "Where is it? Where the hell did she hide it?" he muttered to himself, not knowing that Teresa heard every word, observed every movement from inside the wardrobe. Then he did something she didn't expect. He knelt on the floor near the bed and began to poke at the wooden floorboards with a small knife he took from his pocket. He found a board that seemed looser than the others, and with the tip of the knife began to lift it. It was a hiding place, a small empty space between the floorboard and the foundation of the house. Meanwhile, I was still asleep in the bathtub, completely unaware of what was happening in the room next door. It had been about 15 minutes since I had entered the bath. The water was probably beginning to cool. My skin must have been wrinkled like a prune. And there was my husband, rummaging through the hiding places of the house while I was defenseless. Teresa told me that he became furious when he saw that there was nothing under that board. He swore, punched the floor. "I need to look elsewhere," he said, talking to himself. "Maybe in the guest room." That's when he looked at his watch again and seemed to remember something. "Damn, it's been too long. I need to get her out of the bathtub before she wakes up." He stood up, adjusted his wrinkled clothes, took a few deep breaths, as if he were preparing to enter a stage. He practiced a worried expression on his face and then left the room toward the bathroom. Teresa waited a few seconds and silently came out of the wardrobe. Her heart must have been racing, her hands trembling. She went to Theodore's bedside table and saw something she hadn't noticed before, a small, dark glass bottle without a label. She opened it and smelled the contents. She instantly recognized it. It was tincture of valerian mixed with belladonna. Our grandmother, Martha, was known in the region as a healer and had taught us about herbs since we were little. Valerian was used to calm the nerves for insomnia, belladonna in minimal doses for pain, but together, in larger quantities, they caused a deep sleep, almost a faint. It had nothing to do with fertility. It was a potent sedative. Teresa hid the bottle in her dress pocket and ran to the bathroom through the hallway door, arriving there almost at the same time that Theodore entered through the bedroom door. She pretended that she had just arrived from the market, out of breath, without any bags. "Eleanor fell asleep in the bathtub again?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Theodore was visibly surprised to see her there. For an instant, his mask of concern faltered, and Teresa saw what I had never seen: anger, frustration, perhaps even hatred in the eyes of the man I had married. "Yes, as always," he replied, regaining his composure. "I'm going to get her out now. It's dangerous to stay in the water so long." He pulled me out of the bathtub, wrapped me in a large towel, and carried me to the bed like a dedicated husband, concerned about his wife's health. Teresa pretended to help, bringing my nightgown, pretending to know nothing. Gradually, I began to wake up, confused as I always was. "What happened?" I asked with a slurred voice. "You fell asleep in the bathtub again, my love," said Theodore, caressing my face. "Lucky I got there in time." I looked at Teresa, who was standing at the foot of the bed with a strange expression that I couldn't decipher at the time. "I thought you went to the market." "I did, but I came back quickly." "I forgot the list at home," she improvised. "Theodore announced he was going to the pharmacy to get a tonic for me. He said I looked pale." As soon as he left, Teresa closed the bedroom door and sat next to me on the bed. Her face was so white that it seemed like she, not I, had suffered a fainting spell. "Eleanor, we need to talk," she said with a trembling voice. "Something very wrong is happening in this house." She took the bottle from her pocket and showed it to me. "Do you know what this is? It's what he puts in your tea. They're not herbs for fertility. It's a strong sedative with belladonna." At first, I couldn't believe it. Theodore, my husband, deliberately drugging me. It was too absurd. "You must be mistaken, Tess. Why would he do that?" That's when she told me everything she had seen from the wardrobe. How he had methodically searched for something, how desperate he seemed to find it. How he rummaged through drawers, poked at the floorboard, swore in frustration. "He's looking for something, Eleanor, something important that he thinks you've hidden." It was like a bolt of lightning that illuminated the dark night. Suddenly, everything made sense. The insistence on the tea only on Wednesdays, the fact that I always fell asleep in the bathtub, that I always woke up already in bed, never by myself in the bath. "The house documents," I murmured, feeling a shiver run down my spine. He must be looking for the property documents that Dad left me. My father had left me the house when he died, on the condition that it never be sold outside the family. It was a simple house, but the land was large and was in an area that was beginning to increase in value. A businessman from New York wanted to build a textile factory nearby and was buying all the properties he could. I kept the original documents in an old cookie tin, hidden in the false bottom of the sock drawer. Theodore must have already searched there because the drawer never stayed the way I left it. But the week before, concerned about the safety of the papers, I had taken them to the county clerk's office to make authenticated copies and hadn't brought them back yet. "But why would he look for that?" asked Teresa. "The house is yours, not his." That's when I remembered the comments of the bank manager, Mr. Jenkins, a few weeks before at Sunday service. He had asked me if Theodore had already resolved that delicate situation. When I asked what he meant, Mr. Jenkins was embarrassed. He said he thought I knew. The gambling bets, the unpaid loans, but don't worry, I'm sure he'll settle everything in time. I confronted Theodore, who denied everything. He said that Mr. Jenkins was confusing him with another employee, that he had never made bets, never needed loans, and I, fool that I was, believed him. After all, he was my husband, my companion, the man who wanted to have a child with me. Why would I doubt him? Now it all made sense. He needed money to pay debts, gambling debts that I didn't even know existed, and the house, the land that my father left me, was the solution. He just needed to find the documents, make a fake power of attorney, perhaps forge my signature, and the money from the sale would solve his problems. "My God, Tess," I said, feeling my stomach turn with the realization. He's been deceiving me this whole time. It was never about having a baby. Teresa hugged me tight, letting me cry on her shoulder. "What are we going to do?" she asked. At that moment, I made a decision that would change the course of my life forever. A decision that the young, naive, and trusting Eleanor would never have had the courage to make. But after discovering that the man I loved, with whom I shared a bed and a life, was capable of drugging me for weeks on end without any remorse, something changed inside me. "We're leaving," I answered, wiping away my tears. "Today, before he comes back from the pharmacy." "Where to?" Teresa asked, already getting up, ready to act. "To the city. I'll use the money I saved from selling my sewing work. It's not much, but it's enough to make a new start. Will you come with me?" "Of course I will," my sister replied, squeezing my hand. "I won't leave you alone now." That's how, my dears, I had to open my eyes to the cruel reality of my marriage. That's how I discovered that not every gentle smile hides a good heart. That's how I learned that sometimes we need to sleep in order to finally wake up. That same Wednesday afternoon, while Theodore was at the pharmacy, Teresa and I acted quickly. We had little time, perhaps an hour at most. My hands trembled so much that I could barely fold the clothes to put in the suitcase. I couldn't take much, just the essentials. I carefully chose some pieces of clothing, the few photographs I had of my parents, the small Bible I received at my first communion, and the wooden box where I kept my savings. It wasn't much, about $300 that I had gathered selling embroidery and sewing. Money that Theodore didn't even know I had. While I was packing, I saw the navy blue dress I had worn on my wedding day, hanging in the wardrobe. For an instant, I hesitated. I remembered the day I walked to the altar of the small church in Millbrook, with that lace veil that had belonged to my mother and the orange blossoms in my hair. How happy and hopeful I was, how I believed in the promises made before the pastor and God. I promised to be faithful, to love, and to respect in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health. Empty words, promises broken like fine porcelain fallen to the floor. I left the dress where it was. That innocent and dreamy Eleanor would stay behind, along with the dreams of a happy marriage and the children that never came. "What will you write to him?" asked Teresa, as she closed her small suitcase. This was the hardest part. What to say to the man who had spent months deceiving me, drugging me, looking for a way to steal the only valuable thing I possessed. I took paper and pen and sat at the small desk in the room. My first idea was to write an angry letter, denouncing everything I knew, exposing his betrayal, his lies. But then I thought better. Theodore didn't deserve to know that I had discovered his plan. He deserved to continue desperately searching for documents he would never find. That's when I had an idea, a small revenge, perhaps childish, but one that would give me some satisfaction. I wrote just one line on a piece of paper. "Look under the third floorboard in the guest room. There is what you've been wanting so badly." After writing the note, I went to the guest room that we rarely used. With the help of a kitchen knife, I lifted the third floorboard near the window. In the small empty space underneath, I placed two objects, a sealed letter and my mother's gold ring. The letter was longer. In it, I explained that I knew everything about the tea with Belladonna, about the searches while I was unconscious, about the gambling debts. I told him that the house documents were safe with Mr. Coleman, the town notary, with specific instructions never to hand them over to Theodore, even if he appeared with a power of attorney from me. I wrote that I was leaving and that he shouldn't try to find me. If you try to follow me or harm me in any way, I concluded, I will make sure to tell the whole town how you drugged your own wife. Imagine how that would affect your reputation at the bank. As for my mother's ring, it was a simple piece of yellow gold with a small inlaid diamond. Dad had saved it for me as a memento of her. It was the only piece of real value I owned besides the house. For a moment I hesitated. That ring was a precious memory of my mother, but something told me I would need that small treasure to restart my life. I put the floorboard back in place, making sure it was slightly misaligned, enough to arouse Theodore's curiosity when he found my note. It was already getting dark when we finished packing everything. The clock in the living room marked almost 6 o'clock. Theodore should be returning any minute. The pharmacy wasn't far. He had already taken longer than normal. Perhaps he had stopped at the bar, had a shot of liquid courage to continue his searches when he returned home. "Shall we go through the train station?" asked Teresa, already holding her suitcase. I shook my head. No, he'd look there first. Let's take the bus at the station. We left through the back of the house without looking back. We carried just one suitcase each, an entire life reduced to a few belongings that fit in our hands. The night air was fresh, with the smell of jasmine and wet earth. We walked quickly along the cobblestone streets, avoiding the busier areas. I didn't want to have to give explanations to any curious acquaintance. In a small town, news flies faster than hummingbirds. The Millbrook bus station was just a simple building with 2 boarding platforms. The next ride to the city left in 40 minutes. We bought 2 tickets with the money I had saved and sat in a remote corner of the waiting room, anxious, looking at the door every minute, fearing that Theodore might appear at any moment. Those were the longest 40 minutes of my life. My heart was beating so hard it seemed like it wanted to come out through my mouth. I held the handle of my suitcase so tightly that my knuckles were white. Each time the door of the station opened, I held my breath. Finally, it was time to board. When we got on the bus and settled into the cracked leather seats, I felt such a relief that I almost collapsed in tears. Through the window, I saw Millbrook begin to recede. The central square with its bandstand, the church where I got married, the houses with colorful facades. That little town that I knew like the back of my hand, where I was born, grew up and got married, now became just a landscape that diminished on the horizon. I had no idea what I would do when we reached the city. I didn't know anyone there, didn't have a guaranteed job, didn't even know where we would spend the first night. But I had Teresa by my side, my younger sister, who risked everything to save me. And I had the determination of a woman who woke up from a long dream to discover that reality, however harsh, was preferable to the sweet lie in which she was living. The bus bounced on the dirt road, raising red dust that shone in the last ray of sunlight of the day. I closed my eyes and for the first time in months slept deeply, without the help of any treacherous herb in the tea. We arrived in the city just after midnight. The bus station was almost empty, with only a few sleepy passengers waiting for connections and taxi drivers looking for the last rides of the day. The fluorescent lights seemed harsh after so many hours in the dim light of the bus. The big city scared me. I had never seen so many buildings, so many lights, so much movement even at that hour of the night. "What now?" asked Teresa, holding her suitcase with both hands, looking around like a lost child. I remembered an address that I had kept for years, almost by chance. Mrs. Henderson, a lady who came occasionally to Millbrook to sell lace and embroidery, had a boarding house in the city for respectable young ladies, she would say. I had written down the address once thinking that maybe I would visit her someday. I never imagined that day would come in such an unexpected way. We took a taxi, my first taxi in life. The driver, a gentleman with graying mustaches, looked suspiciously at two young women arriving alone at that hour, but didn't ask questions. I showed him the address written on a small piece of paper already yellowed by time. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was on a narrow, tree-lined street far from downtown. It was a large, old house with a columned porch and a well-tended garden in front. Even at that late hour there was a light on in the front window. We rang the bell hesitantly. What if she didn't remember me? What if there were no rooms available? The door opened, revealing Mrs. Henderson in a flowery robe with her gray hair in curlers covered by a silk scarf. Her eyes widened at the sight of me. "Eleanor, child, what are you doing here at this hour and with suitcases?" I explained in the simplest way possible that my marriage had ended, that I needed to start over, that I had nowhere to go. I didn't go into details about Theodore or the tea with Belladonna. Some stories are too heavy to share at midnight on a doorstep. Mrs. Henderson didn't ask more questions, opened the door completely, and invited us in. "I have a vacant room in the back," she said. "It's not big, but it fits 2 twin beds. We can talk better in the morning." That night, lying in a strange bed, listening to Teresa's breathing in the dark, I thought about what Theodore might be doing at that moment. Had he returned home and found my note? Was he tearing up the 3rd floorboard of the guest room, reading my letter, finding my mother's ring? Was he furious, or perhaps even worried about me? It didn't matter anymore. That chapter of my life was closed. What would come next? I had no idea. I only knew that, for the first time in a long time, the decisions about my future were exclusively in my hands. It was scary, and at the same time, liberating. The next day, when the sun came in through the window of the small room, bringing a new day and new possibilities, I knew I had made the right choice. It felt as if I had woken up from a long sleep, not just from the sleep induced by Theodore's tea, but from a deeper numbness, that of a woman who had forgotten her own worth. Mrs. Henderson served us breakfast in the cozy kitchen of the boarding house. Homemade bread, orange marmalade, strong coffee. While we ate, I told a bit more of my story. Not everything. Some wounds were still too recent to be exposed, but enough for her to understand our situation. "I need work," I finally said, placing the cup on the table. "Anything honest." Mrs. Henderson smiled, revealing the absence of a front tooth, which somehow made her smile even more genuine. "Can you cook, child?" "I know how to make the desserts my mother taught me. Coconut candy, custard, cornbread, milk pudding. People in Millbrook always praised them." "Well," she said, getting up to clear the table, "I have a friend who needs help in her bakery. It doesn't pay much, but it's a start. And you can stay here at the boarding house for now, in the back room. We'll settle the rent later." And that's how, my dears, I began my new life. From a wife drugged by a deceitful husband, I became a bakery assistant in the city. The hands that once embroidered layettes for the baby that never came now kneaded sponge cake batter and beat egg whites for meringues. The first months were difficult. I would wake up in the middle of the night, disoriented, not recognizing where I was. I had nightmares about Theodore finding me, dragging me back to Millbrook. I cried hidden in the bakery bathroom when the longing for my home, my parents, the life I knew, squeezed my heart. But gradually, day by day, cup of sugar by cup of sugar, I built a new Eleanor, a woman who didn't need a man to define who she was, a woman who had survived betrayal and emerged stronger, a woman who made the best custards in the city. When I arrived in the city in 1963, working as an assistant at Mrs. Henderson's Friend's Bakery, I would never have imagined that would be the beginning of such a sweet journey. The bakery was called Grandma's Delights. Ironically, the owner, Mrs. Parker, had no grandchildren, but thought the name gave a cozy feel to the place. It was a small shop, squeezed between a barber shop and a fabric store, with just 4 small round marble tables and iron chairs. But what it lacked in space, it made up for in aroma and flavor. The smell of vanilla, cinnamon, and caramelizing sugar invaded the sidewalk and attracted customers like a spell. In the first months, my function was basically to wash dishes, clean the floor, and occasionally help beat dough. Mrs. Parker was rigorous, one of those who sifted flour 3 times before adding it to the recipe. "Baking is science, child," she would say, adjusting her glasses on the tip of her nose. 1 gram more of baking powder and the cake becomes a crater. I observed everything with attention, absorbing every detail like a sponge. Sometimes, when Mrs. Parker was distracted, I would experiment with adding a different touch to the recipes, an extra pinch of cinnamon in the apple cake, a bit of lemon zest in the vanilla icing, small adjustments that, to my surprise, she ended up noticing. "Who messed with the pudding mixture?" she asked one day, furrowing her brow as she tasted the dessert still hot. I confessed, trembling, expecting a scolding. Instead, she looked at me over her glasses and said, "It's better this way. What did you put in?" "A little bit of almond extract, Mrs. Parker. My mother always used it." After that day, she began to let me experiment more, create variations of traditional recipes. She discovered that I had a gift for harmonizing flavors, for knowing exactly how long to leave the caramel on the fire before it turned into burnt sugar, for feeling when the sponge cake batter was at the right point just by the smell. Teresa also got a job as a clerk in a pharmacy near the boarding house. We shared the small back room in Mrs. Henderson's house, saving every possible penny. At night, after work, I would spend hours drawing in an old notebook ideas for new desserts, dreaming of the day when I could have my own business. It was almost a year after our arrival in the city that I received an unexpected letter. It was from Mr. Coleman, the notary from Millbrook. I opened it with trembling hands, fearing news of Theodore, but the content surprised me. Coleman explained that, following my instructions before leaving, he had refused to hand over the house documents to Theodore even when he appeared with a power of attorney with my signature obviously forged. Unable to sell the house to pay his debts, Theodore had abandoned Millbrook a few months after my departure, leaving behind a pile of furious creditors. The letter continued, explaining that, as I had not given any news for almost a year, the house was deteriorating. Mr. Coleman suggested that I consider selling the property before it lost more value, offering to handle the transaction. "There is an interested buyer," he wrote, "the New York businessman who is expanding the textile factory." I showed the letter to Teresa that same night. "What do you think we should do?" I asked, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed. My sister didn't hesitate. "Sell the house, Eleanor. That place only has bad memories now. Use the money to start your own bakery." I replied to Mr. Coleman the next day, authorizing the sale. The process took a few months, but finally, in mid-1964, I received an envelope containing a check that represented everything that remained of my previous life. The value of the sale of my parents' house, less taxes and commissions. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed at the boarding house, looking at that piece of paper for a long time. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to take the first step toward my dream. That same week, I found a small property to rent 2 blocks from the main square. It was a tiny space that previously housed a shoe repair shop. It had a dusty storefront facing the street, a wooden counter with marks of use, and a wood-fired oven in the back that miraculously still worked. When I told Mrs. Parker that I intended to open my own business, I thought she would be upset about losing an employee. Instead, she held my hands in hers, already marked by time and work, and said, "It was about time, child. You were born to have your own place." And so, Sweet Memories was born. The name came from a conversation with Teresa when I commented that each recipe brought me a different memory. The custard reminded me of Sundays at Grandma's. The cornbread brought back rainy afternoons on the porch with Mom. The milk pudding was Dad's favorite dessert. "They're sweets made of good memories," said Teresa. And so the name naturally emerged, like the scent of vanilla that spreads through the kitchen. We inaugurated the bakery in September 1964 with very little money for decoration or advertising. The only extravagance I allowed myself was a hand-painted sign on the facade in blue cursive letters, "Sweet Memories, Artisanal Bakery." Below the name, a small illustration of a golden ring, the same one I had left for Theodore to find under the floorboard of the guest room, and which now, recovered thanks to Mr. Coleman, had become the symbol of my new beginning. The first months were tight. We went days without a single customer, besides curious neighbors who came in to take a peek and left buying a chocolate truffle out of courtesy. There were moments when I thought I had made a terrible mistake, that I should have saved the money from the sale of the house for an emergency. That's when I had the idea to create something different, something that no one else in the city offered, sweets that told stories. I began to create miniature scenes with sugar, small fondant sculptures that represented everyday scenes or nature. A garden of sugar flowers adorning a birthday cake, a gingerbread house with meticulous details for Christmas, a small lake of blue jelly with meringue swans floating on it. People began to enter the bakery just to see the creations in the window. Soon came orders for special occasions. "I want a cake that tells the story of our engagement," asked a young bride. "Can you make little horse-shaped candies for my son's party?" asked a mother. Each request was a challenge that I accepted with enthusiasm. I spent sleepless nights experimenting with new techniques, mixing colors in the sugar paste, testing structures that would remain firm without losing their delicacy. Many times Teresa would find me asleep on the kitchen table, with my fingers still stained with food coloring. One day, I received an order that would change the course of my small business. The mayor's wife entered the bakery looking for something special for her husband's 50th birthday. "I want to surprise him," she said, "something that no one has ever seen before." I spent a week working on that cake. I recreated in sugar and chocolate the central square of the city, with the bandstand, the benches, the trees, even the pigeons, everything in miniature with impressive details. In the center of the square, a small figure of the mayor sitting on a bench reading the newspaper. The success was immediate. Photos of the cake appeared in the local newspaper. People who had never heard of Sweet Memories began to appear. Soon, I needed to hire help. First, a young woman to attend the counter, then a kitchen assistant, and finally a baker to help me with the orders that kept coming in. In 1968, 4 years after the inauguration, Sweet Memories no longer fit in that tiny space. We moved to a larger property with a room for 20 tables, a spacious and modern kitchen, and even a small area for children's parties. Teresa left her job at the pharmacy to become the administrative manager of the bakery, taking care of accounts, suppliers, and hiring. It was at this time that I met Gerald, a fruit supplier who came from the countryside to deliver fresh strawberries and blackberries every week. He was a quiet man, of few words, with gentle eyes and calloused hands, from someone who knew the hard work of the land. We started a calm friendship based on mutual respect and admiration for each other's work. Unlike Theodore, Gerald never tried to impress me with grand gestures or promises. He was simply there, as reliable as the sunrise, bringing the freshest fruit he could find, because he knew I accepted only the best for my desserts. Our first date outside the bakery was for coffee on a Sunday afternoon. We talked about our childhoods, our families, our dreams. I told him fragments of my story with Theodore. Not everything, as some wounds were still sensitive, but enough for him to understand why I was so cautious. "You built something beautiful out of pain," he said, looking at the bakery across the street. "That says a lot about who you are, Ellie." Our relationship grew slowly, like a plant that needs time to establish roots before flowering. There were no hasty promises of eternal love, no dramatic vows in the moonlight, just the growing certainty, day by day, that we had found in each other something precious and true. In 1970, we married in a simple ceremony in the garden of the house we bought together on the outskirts of the city. I was 32 years old, considered a late bride by the standards of the time, and had the wisdom of someone who learned the hard way the difference between appearance and essence. This time I didn't wear a white dress or a lace veil. I chose a light blue ensemble, simple and elegant. In place of the traditional wedding cake, we created together a dessert table that told our story. Miniature fruits in marzipan, representing Gerald's orchard, small confectionery utensils made of sugar paste, and in the center, a perfect replica of our new house with windows of crystallized sugar that shimmered in the sun. In the following years, God blessed us with 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys, who grew up between the aroma of vanilla from the bakery and the smell of damp earth from the orchard. I taught them the value of honest work, the importance of family, and mainly the art of transforming difficult moments into something sweet. Sweet memories continued to grow. By 1980, we had 3 branches in the city and supplied desserts to the best hotels and restaurants in the region. The ring symbol in our logo became synonymous with quality and creativity. Our wedding cakes were booked months in advance, and we had customers who traveled from other cities just to taste our specialties. More important than commercial success, however, was the family we built, a family based on respect, trust, and true love. Not that fairy tale love, but real love that strengthens in difficulties and proves itself in the small kindnesses of everyday life. And so, my dears, from a woman drugged by her own husband every Wednesday, I became the founder of a successful chain of bakeries and matriarch of a united and loving family. Life has these turns, doesn't it? It was the year 1983. I was already 45 years old, had 4 teenage children, and Sweet Memories was at the height of its success. That autumn morning, I was at the main bakery, supervising the preparations for the wedding of the governor's daughter, an event that would definitively put our brand on the map of high society. The kitchen was pure agitation. 20 pastry chefs worked simultaneously, creating sugar flowers, modeling marzipan figures, seasoning doughs, caramelizing fruits. The aroma was a symphony of vanilla, chocolate, cinnamon, and caramelized sugar. I walked between the counters, tasting, adjusting, guiding, the conductor of that flavor orchestra. That's when Margaret, our oldest attendant, hurriedly entered the kitchen. "Mrs. Eleanor, there's a gentleman outside who wants to speak with you. He wouldn't give his name, but insists it's important." Unscheduled visitors weren't uncommon. Many wanted to meet the famous Eleanor of the Sugar Sculptures, as the local newspapers called me. I adjusted my white uniform, ran my hand through my hair, now with some gray strands that I didn't bother to hide, and headed to the main salon. Sitting at one of the tables near the window, with his back to me, was a man with completely white hair, worn clothes, and hunched shoulders. Something in that silhouette seemed vaguely familiar to me, like a half-forgotten melody trying to come back to memory. "Good morning, sir. I'm Eleanor. How can I help you?" When he turned around, time seemed to freeze. 20 years had passed, but I would recognize those eyes anywhere. Theodore, my ex-husband, the man who drugged me on Wednesdays to search our house, was no longer the elegant young man in an impeccable suit that I had known. His face was marked by deep wrinkles, his skin mottled by the sun and by hard life. His eyes, once lively and bright, now seemed opaque, sunken in dark circles. His hands, resting on a worn wooden cane, trembled slightly. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: surprise, fear, anger, pity, and surprisingly, a kind of calm. It was as if I was facing a ghost that in the light of day had lost all its power to frighten. "Eleanor," he said in a hoarse voice, almost a whisper, "you look beautiful." For an instant, I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to call security and have him thrown out of my bakery. Another part wanted to understand what he could want after so many years. "What are you doing here, Theodore?" I asked, keeping my voice firm without sitting down. "I've come to ask for your forgiveness," he replied, lowering his gaze to his trembling hands. "I know I don't deserve it, but I needed to try before it's too late." I noticed then how fragile, how sick he looked. It wasn't just age. There was something else. A paleness, a thinness that spoke of illness. "Are you sick?" I asked, finally sitting down in the chair across from him. He nodded. "Cancer. The doctors say I have a few months. Before I go, I needed to find you, to clear my conscience, if that's even possible." I remained silent for a few moments, observing the man in front of me. He no longer posed any threat to me. He was just a sick old man, carrying the weight of his past choices. "How did you find me?" I finally asked. "It wasn't difficult. Your name is in the newspapers. The Queen of Desserts, they call you." He tried to smile, but the result was a sad grimace. "I'm proud of what you've built, Eleanor. I always knew you were special." "Don't try to flatter me now, Theodore. It's too late for that." He nodded, accepting my harshness as just punishment. "You're right. I have no right to say that. I don't even have the right to be here, but I needed you to know. I never forgave myself for what I did. Each day of these 20 years has been a reminder of my mistake, my cowardice, my greed." I asked Margaret to bring us coffee. While we waited, Theodore told me what happened after I fled with Teresa, how he found my note and ran to the guest room, tearing up the floorboard with such violence that he tore his nails until they bled. How he read my letter, found my mother's ring, and realized that he had lost everything. Not just the chance to pay his debts, but something much more valuable: the love of a good woman. His creditors cornered him. He lost his job at the bank. He had to flee Millbrook in the middle of the night, leaving behind even his expensive clothes and shiny shoes. In the following years, he lived from odd jobs, slept in shelters, reached the rock bottom that he had dug with his own hands. "I tried to look for you several times," he confessed. "Not to bring you back or harm you, just to ask for forgiveness, but I never had enough courage." The coffee arrived, served in our fine porcelain cups with the golden ring logo. I saw Theodore's eyes linger on the symbol, recognizing it. "Your mother's ring," he murmured. "You transformed it into something beautiful, I see." "I transformed many things into something beautiful, Theodore, including the pain you caused me." We remained silent for a few moments. the past hovering between us like a mist that gradually dissipated. Finally, I asked, "What exactly do you want from me?" "Your forgiveness," he answered simply. "I know I have no right to ask. I know that what I did was unforgivable. Drugging my own wife, searching the house looking for documents, lying about wanting a child." His voice faltered. "I was a monster, Eleanor, and I paid for it every day of these 20 years. But before I depart, I needed to look into your eyes and say, 'I'm sorry.'" I looked at him for a long time, the man I once loved, who once betrayed me in the cruelest way, the man who inadvertently pushed me toward a life I would never have imagined for myself. "You know I have a family now? 4 children, a wonderful husband, a successful chain of bakeries." He nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "I know. I read about you in the newspapers. I saw photos of your family. Your children are beautiful. I'm happy, Theodore, happier than I ever dreamed of being when I was your wife. I'm glad for you, truly," he said, and I realized he was sincere. At that moment, something strange happened inside me. The anger I had harbored for so many years, that anger that no longer burned as before, but was still there, like embers under ashes, began to dissipate. Not because he deserved my forgiveness, but because I deserved the peace that comes from letting go of a heavy burden. "I forgive you, Theodore," I finally said. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I've carried this grudge for too long." I saw tears form in his eyes, tears that he tried to hide by lowering his head. "Thank you," he murmured. "You were always better than I deserved. What will you do now? Do you have somewhere to stay? Someone to take care of you?" He shook his head. "I'm in a shelter downtown. I don't have anyone. But don't worry about me. I've already caused enough trouble in your life." That sick and lonely man was no longer the villain of my story. He was just a human being facing his last days, reaping what he had sown. "Wait here," I said, getting up. I went to my office and grabbed my checkbook. I returned to the salon and wrote a check with an amount sufficient for him to rent a decent room and pay for basic medical care for a few months. "I can't accept this," he said when he saw the amount. "It's not a gift, Theodore. Consider it a final settlement. You were looking so hard for money back then. Now I'm giving you some. Ironic, isn't it?" He took the check with trembling hands, folding it carefully before putting it in the worn pocket of his jacket. "There's something else I want to show you," I said, standing up. "Come with me." I took him to the kitchen, where the wedding cake for the governor's daughter was almost ready. It was a work of art in sugar, 5 tiers of delicate cake covered with white fondant, decorated with hundreds of sugar flowers in shades of pink and pearl. At the top, 2 sugar swans with intertwined necks, forming a heart. "You made this?" he asked, amazed. "With these hands?" "With these hands," I replied, showing my calloused palms from work. "The same hands that you once held at the altar, the hands that you imagined would only serve to take care of your house and the children we never had." Theodore contemplated the cake in silence, his face a mixture of admiration and regret. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he finally said. "Life is like that," I replied. "Sometimes we need to go through bitter moments to create something sweet." He nodded, understanding. "I need to go," he said. "I've already taken too much of your day." I accompanied him to the door of the bakery. On the sidewalk, we stopped to say goodbye. "Goodbye, Eleanor, and thank you, not just for the check, but for allowing me to make peace with my past." "Goodbye, Theodore. I hope you find peace." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something else, but just nodded and walked away, his cane rhythmically tapping on the ground. I watched his silhouette move away, his shoulders hunched, his slow walk. The man I once so feared, now reduced to a shadow of what he had been. I found out 6 months later, through a small obituary in the newspaper, that Theodore had passed away. The announcement simply said that he departed in peace and that he left no relatives. I said a silent prayer for his soul, thanking God for having freed me from the cycle of hurt and resentment. This encounter, my dears, was one of the most important moments of my life. Not because I needed Theodore's forgiveness, I had moved on long before, but because it allowed me to close a cycle, to free myself from the last ties that still bound me to the past. The years passed, my children grew up, graduated, got married, and then came the grandchildren, 9 in all, each one sweeter than the other. Gerald and I grew old together side by side, sharing the joy of seeing our hard work and our love flourish in a united and prosperous family. In 1990, at 52 years old, I passed the daily administration of the Sweet Memories chain to my eldest daughter, Janine, who inherited my talent for baking and my instinct for business. I continued to create new recipes and supervise the most important cakes, but with less pressure, more time to enjoy the grandchildren and the company of my Gerald. Today, at 87, I look back and see a life that wasn't perfect, but was authentic and full. A life that taught me that we can transform any experience, even the bitterest, into something sweet and nourishing for the soul. I learned that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or minimizing the harm done to us. It means freeing ourselves from the chains of resentment that bind us to the past and prevent us from fully living the present. I learned that our strength doesn't come from the absence of problems, but from the ability to transform them into steps for our growth. I learned that true love isn't the one from sugary romances, but the one built day by day in small kindnesses, in mutual respect, in unwavering trust. I learned that sometimes we need to faint to finally wake up to life. Whether it's a literal fainting, like the ones I suffered in that old bathtub, or a metaphorical awakening to our own strength and worth. And now, my dears, I come to the end of this story. If you followed it from the beginning, I hope you found not just entertainment, but also inspiration and perhaps a little strength to face your own challenges. Every Wednesday, I would pass out in the bath, but each fall made me stronger. Each betrayal taught me to trust in my own worth. Each obstacle transformed into opportunity. And that's what I wish for each of you, that you transform your pains into strength, your challenges into achievements, your bitter moments into something sweet and nourishing for the soul. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey of memories. If this video touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel.